Finally, guys, Formula 1 was back today with the first day of pre-season testing in 2020. And in this video, guys, I'm going to review the action of day one, who did what, who was looking better than others, who had, certain reliability issues, and of course, looking at the times, the amount of laps completed, all of that stuff. We are now going to get into that right here, right now. And before we go into the individual teams, first off, let's look at the official results from day one of testing in 2020. So, finishing first and second, Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas. Sergio Perez is third, Max Verstappen fourth, Daniel Kvyat fifth, Carlos Sainz in sixth, Daniel Ricciardo P7, Esteban Ocon eighth, George Russell in ninth, and then Lance Stroll in 10th. Also, we definitely have to mention the amount of laps completed by the teams and drivers today. So, for example, Lewis Hamilton on 94 laps, Valtteri Bottas 79, Perez 58, Max Verstappen 168 laps. For the first day of testing, that is absolutely incredible. I cannot believe that he's done that many laps for the first day of testing. Then Daniel Kvyat's done 115, Carlos Sainz 161, and then 54 for Ricciardo, 62 for Ocon, 73 for Russell, and then 50 for Stroll. And then the rest of the drivers are Leclerc in P11, Latifi 12th, Kubica 13th, Magnussen 14th, and Antonio Giovinazzi in 15th place. And again, I'll read off the amount of laps completed by the drivers. So Charles Leclerc did 131 laps, Latifi did 63, Kubica 59, Magnussen 104, and Antonio Giovinazzi did 78. But first off, let's go to the world champions Mercedes. And today obviously was a good day, finishing 1 and 2 in the timesheets, but as we know, timesheets don't really matter in testing. But the reliability was absolutely there for this team. The car, in terms of how it looked on track, it looked 90% of the time consistent, and it did look just as good as it did last season. So definitely this team has, I think, a very good base for 2020 after what was a great 2019. The only thing from today that was, I guess, slightly concerning was when watching on board in the slower corners, this car did have a bit of instability at the rear and was a bit oversteery. But other than that, again, this car on track really does look good. And on its longer runs, it also was very consistent in the lap times it was setting. So, yeah, Mercedes, again, very good, very strong. And it's not really, is it, a surprise that they are so strong at the moment, even on the first day of testing. Next up, we'll go to Ferrari. And of course, Ferrari in the timesheets ended up very low down, but I don't think they were pushing anywhere near as hard as what they could do. And I think really today they were concentrating on, working out how their aerodynamics are, affecting their car. Also, of course, which is very important, they were focusing on getting reliability early on. So 131 laps is, I think, good for Ferrari and Charles Leclerc. It's a shame Sebastian Vettel couldn't drive today because he was ill, apparently. That's why he couldn't drive today, and that's why Charles Leclerc instead had to drive the Ferrari. But I think, way too early to tell if Ferrari, are miles off the pace of Mercedes, for example. But today was really about reliability for everyone, and Ferrari look as though they have that, a lot. So I think a good day for Ferrari, and we can't really read anything else into their day. Next up is Red Bull, and, reliability was fantastic for Red Bull. Max Verstappen completed over a race distance by lunchtime, or by the lunch break, in this day one of preseason testing. That is absolutely incredible reliability and consistency from the Honda-powered Red Bull. And I think it also shows you just how reliable the cars are nowadays compared to even, 4 or 5 years ago, where I don't think this would have been 168 laps over the entire first day. I don't think 4 or 5 years ago that was really possible. But today, very, very reliable that car was. The only bad moments of the day was when Max Verstappen spun at the same corner, but for different reasons twice. I think at turn 13, I think it was. One time he touched the gravel and spun, and then the other time he took a bit too much curb on entry and again spun his car. But other than that, great day in terms of reliability. The car on track looked not amazing, but definitely good. And yeah, definitely a good day one for the Red Bull team. But now, let's head into the midfield. First off, McLaren. And McLaren also, in terms of reliability, very, very good day. Carlos Sainz, 161 laps in the McLaren. Very, very strong when it comes to reliability. And the car on track didn't always look smooth when they started, or when Carlos Sainz, started to push that car a bit harder than most laps he was doing today. It didn't always look comfortable, looked a bit oversteery out of the slower corners, but again, day one and day two also is mainly about just making sure the car's reliable and working properly, and the McLaren is reliable and working properly. So great day for McLaren as well when it comes to reliability, and the car looks, I wouldn't say very good, but it looks, good enough, I think, for the first day of testing. Next up is Renault. Renault have, you got to say, as you look at this picture, they do have a very unique looking car with that front nose cone. And today was, an interesting day. The car on track looked, I'd say, decent. I think at best you could say good on track. The handling was looking all right, I think, most of the time. The only concern or bad thing of the day was when Renault seemingly took way too long to get Daniel Ricciardo out on track, to change over from Esteban Ocon to Daniel Ricciardo and get Ricciardo out on circuit. I think that's the only real concern of the day, is that they took a bit too long to get Ricciardo out on the circuit. But other than that, the reliability seemed to be not great, but good enough for the first day of testing for Renault. And the car aerodynamically on track looked absolutely fine. So again, good day for Renault. The next team was AlphaTauri, who in the morning did not have that good of a start to the first day of testing, as they had some software issues that was causing slight reliability issues. Also, I think they had a cooling issue, which affected Daniel Kvyat's running in the morning. And that's why Daniel was not able to, say, push harder earlier in the day. But I think AlphaTauri were really running a bit more fuel on board compared to everyone else during the morning than they were in the afternoon. In the afternoon, they didn't really have any issues. They ran the car a bit lighter, a bit more aggressive, and we got to see a bit more of the car. And the car on track, once they start to push it a bit harder, it does look like a good car for sure. I don't know, of course, and I don't think anyone knows right now how good of a car it looks, but I think it's definitely something that Daniel Kvyat and Pierre Gasly, will have fun driving, and it's something that they can absolutely work with. So the day didn't start off well, but at least it ended well for that team. But from the midfield pack, I think the best day has to go to Racing Point, not only because reliability was there for the team, but also the car on track really did look a lot better than it did 12 months ago. 12 months ago, this team really didn't look good at all. I mean, they didn't really look ready at all for the 2019 season, but for this season, the car looks a lot better on track. They're a lot more ready for this season than they were in the 2019 season. And whether it's a Mercedes car or not, people have been saying that, this is basically just a Mercedes car resprayed. Whether it is or not, this car is looking a lot better than it was 12 months ago. And I think definitely out of the midfield pack, again, we don't want to read too much into lap times, but considering Sergio Perez was already on the first day of testing quite a bit faster than he was in qualifying at the Spanish Grand Prix at the same track last year, I think by no surprise, they are going to be the biggest improvers in terms of lap time compared to what they did 12 months ago, in the midfield. So I think definitely the best day out of the midfield has to go to Racing Point. Car looking good, and hopefully that continues into day 2. Now, Alfa Romeo had good reliability, I think. They didn't really push the car that hard at all. Robert Kubica did start pushing it a bit more towards the end of the morning, but Antonio Giovinazzi did a lot of race runs and was running a lot of fuel during the afternoon. So, can't really say that much about Alfa Romeo. I think definitely they were, out of the midfield teams, probably sandbagging, maybe not the most, but they were one of the most, sandbagged teams in terms of running a lot of fuel, not, running a high engine mode. They're definitely not pushing as hard as other teams in the midfield, such as Racing Point and McLaren. So a lot more to come from Alfa Romeo. The car on track looks, I wouldn't say great, but it looks all right so far from what I've seen. So yeah, a lot more to come, I think, for Alfa Romeo. And I think really the same goes for Haas F1. I think they also, during the first day of testing, were not pushing as hard as other midfield teams and were trying to more so get a balance over a race fuel run rather than going for, quicker lap times on lower fuel. And I think Haas, again, that is a good thing for them to concentrate on that because, of course, race pace and, pace on race fuel last year was a massive problem. So hopefully they do improve on that. And definitely today, I think they were also one of those midfield teams that was not quite pushing as hard as other midfield teams. So like Alfa Romeo, I think Haas, there is a lot more to come from them in terms of what they can show on track. Just like, again, Alfa Romeo. But for me, the best performing team of the day, if you compare what they did to last season, has to be the Williams team. Because this time last year, they were so incredibly slow. They couldn't put many laps on the board because they'd only just really turned up to testing. I mean, I know day 1 and day 2 of the first test last year, they didn't actually turn up. But obviously, they did turn up to 6 of the 8 days of testing last year, and this year we do have 6 days of testing. So if you compare this to their first day of testing from last year, it's much, much better. And Russell in the Williams was much faster today in terms of lap time than he was in qualifying for the Spanish Grand Prix of 2019 at the same track. Again, I'm sure he was running not absolutely skinny, but, was running with a bit of fuel on board. But I think that just shows you right there how much progress Williams have made. And maybe they will still be the slowest car on the grid, and I still expect them to be that. But in terms of pure lap time, they are going to be the biggest improvers out of any team on the grid. And it's good to see that Williams are maybe not a midfield team again, or looking maybe like they could be towards the back of the midfield, but, they're making a lot of progress in terms of the pace of their car. Very good to see, and hopefully that does keep up. But guys, that is the review of the action of day 1 of 2020 preseason testing. Hopefully day 2 offers a further look at what the pecking order could be for the 2020 Formula 1 season. So that's it, guys, for day 2 of 2020 preseason testing. And now it's time to review the events of day 2 and all the talking points, and we're going to get straight into it. But first, before we get into the teams and how they got on during day 2 of preseason testing, let's first look at the times and the amount of laps everyone did during the day. So here is the top 10 on day 2. Kimi Räikkönen fastest of all on a 1:17.0, 134 laps. He did break down at the end of the day, but apparently that was him or Alfa Romeo deliberately running out of fuel Don't ask me why. I have no idea why they would do that. Sergio Perez second, 117.3, 145 laps. Ricciardo 17.7 in third, 41 laps. Albon 17.9, 132 laps. And then Gasly fifth, 18.1, 146 laps. And then Sebastian Vettel sixth, 118.1, 72 laps. George Russell 118.2, 116 laps. And then Charles Leclerc did the morning for Ferrari, 118.3, 49 laps. Lewis Hamilton also did the morning, 118.3, 106 laps. And then Lando Norris, 118.4, 136 laps. And then P11, P12, and P13, Romain Grosjean, 118.4, 158 laps. That's the most laps done by any one driver, but not team. The most laps of today was done by the Silver Arrows Mercedes. Esteban Ocon, 51 laps at a 118.5. And then Valtteri Bottas, 119.3, 77 laps. And talking of Valtteri Bottas and Mercedes, let's get straight into them. Now, of course, we weren't going to see the real pace of the Mercedes today. The car on track, in terms of balance, looked mostly very good. Reliability, slight concern because their day was ended early by an electrical issue on the car. That's why they did not really go out for the final hour or so of day 2 of testing. So a bit of a slight worry there, but they should be able to fix it. But reliability before that was very good. Again, most laps completed by any team. And again, balance of the car looked very, very good. But the biggest talking point to come out about Mercedes from day 2 of testing is this new steering system called DAS, Dual Axis Steering, and then, of course, System. Now, essentially, what we think it does is it adjusts the toe of the car whilst going down the straight. And, of course, if you do that, it can help straight line speed and give them a bit more speed on the straights. And how they were doing this is in the morning, and Valtteri Bottas as well was caught doing this as well, pulling the steering wheel, I think, out to adjust it and then pushing it back in again when at the end of a straight. People have questioned the legality of it. Helmut Marko from Red Bull thinks it isn't legal. From what I've seen, I think it is, mostly legal. I think the only thing that could really harm its chances of staying on the car is the possible safety aspect. But in terms of the technical side, I think it's a very cool and very good innovation, and I think they will get away with it. So good to see from Mercedes there, another innovation. And yeah, I think they will keep it. But very interesting to see that on the onboard camera of the car today. But other than that, I think definitely mostly good day. Next up, Ferrari, and good news for Ferrari after Sebastian Vettel missed yesterday. He was back in the car today, this afternoon, and Ferrari, like they did yesterday, not pushing, of course, like the other two teams are, but they're not taking it, they're not pounding around the track as much as other teams are. They're not getting the miles in as much, again, as other teams are. So that is a slight concern that they're not willing to be out there on the track as much as, again, Mercedes, Red Bull, even teams like Haas F1 today, for example. They weren't putting in as many laps as maybe you would have hoped from Ferrari. But the car on track, the balance looks, well, compared to the rest of the field, I mean, it's still going to be one of the, 2 or 3 best cars on the grid. Still, though, when watching on board, you can still see in the slower corners that understeer that did plague them last year, especially in turn 5 and turn 10. You could really see how the front just wasn't biting into the corner and just wasn't getting into the apex. Like, again, the Mercedes, when you saw that on board, it was able to get a lot closer to the apex. So still a concern when it comes to that. But other than that, not much to say on Ferrari. They're not pushing, of course, like the other two teams are, of course, not pushing as well. Hopefully, we get to see a bit more of the Ferrari tomorrow on day 3. Next up, Red Bull. And yeah, similar day for Albon to what Max Verstappen had yesterday. Of course, Red Bull not pushing. Reliability is what they're focusing on, and they do have reliability in bags full, and the Honda engine is looking very good when it comes to reliability. And I think definitely Red Bull can be happy with the reliability of the Red Bull Honda as a whole. And on track, in terms of balance, the Red Bull car doesn't look great. It doesn't amaze you, but it does look very comfortable to drive, as the Red Bull car of last year, especially the end of last year, also did look. So, good looking car. And as ever, Red Bull in, I think, good shape with the balance of that car. But now, into the midfield we go. McLaren first up. And McLaren today were focusing on a setup for the race, or on race fuel. And that is, of course, a very important thing to focus on in Formula One. So we didn't really get to see as much of, I guess, the lower fuel pace of the McLaren as we did yesterday with Carlos Sainz. But the McLaren on track still looks good. Again, nothing amazing or nothing to get excited about compared to the top teams, Mercedes, Ferrari, or Red Bull. But I think it looks, a good, decent car for McLaren so far. Reliability seems to be there, again, like Red Bull in bags full. So I think McLaren could call that a very good day. And hopefully their good reliability really does continue into day 3. Next up, though, is Renault, and I've got to say, I think out of all of the teams, Renault have probably had so far the worst pre-season testing program. When it comes to the grip of the car on track, it doesn't look bad or terrible. It's like the McLaren. It doesn't absolutely amaze you, but I wouldn't say, it's a horrible car or it's definitely off the pace. But I have to say, the performance of the Renault team, mechanics, engineers, whatever, in getting the car out on track, ready for the morning, the afternoon sessions, I'm sorry, not good enough. Apparently, they were 30 minutes late in getting him out on track this morning, getting Daniel Ricciardo out on track, and then Esteban Ocon wasn't out on track for, an hour and a half, I think it was. I'm sorry, not good enough. And this was the same thing they did yesterday as well. They have got to be doing this better. And they didn't even hit, with Ricciardo and Ocon in the car today, they didn't even hit 100 laps today, which, 3 or 4 years ago would have been fine. But when you've got Haas F1 doing almost 160 laps and AlphaTauri doing, 120, McLaren doing 135, I think, I'm sorry, it's not good enough. Renault have got to be better prepared, and have got to be out on track longer, because the longer they're not ready, they're losing valuable track time, valuable data. They've got to get out there on track and really start putting some laps in, because so far, Renault just haven't really featured a lot during pre-season testing, and they've got to do more so, especially tomorrow on day 3. Next up, AlphaTauri. I'd say for AlphaTauri today, a much better day than day 1. I mean, day 1, of course, in the morning, they were running a bit more conservatively, and it has slight technical issues with their car. Today, no issues with the car. The car on track looked very good in terms of the balance. Reliability's there. The speed, I actually think they've got quite a fast car there. I don't think it's, amazingly quick compared to other midfield rivals, but I think right there, just looking at the way the car looks on track, I think they have got a nicely balanced, well-working car for 2020. So the car looks good on track, reliability's there. I think definitely you can say a very good day. I would, though, like to see more of it on track to get a better understanding in terms of the balance of the car. But from what I've seen, it's a good car, and I don't think there's anything really to complain about this team. Next up, Racing Point, and they continued their fantastic day 1 performance with, again, Sergio Perez right up there. He was fastest, for most of day 2 until Kimi Raikkonen put in a late time on the C5 compound of tyre. Sergio Perez drove very well. Racing Point looked very good on track. Again, the balance looks a lot better than it did this time last year when it was at testing in 2019. And still, you can tell the pace difference between last year's Racing Point is massive. And if you look at all of last year's midfield teams, I think Racing Point, in terms of pure lap time compared to what they did last year, you're going to notice they are going to be the biggest gainers, I think, this season. I think it's pretty clear to see already that they are quite a bit ahead of where they were this time last year. And Racing Point didn't have last season a horrible season. I mean, at the start of the season in 2019, they were actually quite competitive. So I think Racing Point have definitely got a good car. Whether it's a Mercedes car or not, doesn't matter. They have got, I think, a properly quick racing car for 2020. Next up is Alfa Romeo. Again, Alfa caused a late and the first red flag of testing, which is very surprising not to have a red flag, for that long. By, again, deliberately running out of fuel, which I don't quite understand, but there you go. Kimi Räikkönen, most of the day, focused on race runs, race simulations, getting a balance over that. When we looked at the car on board, it looked a bit ponderous in its turn into some corners, but compared to last year, it doesn't really look any worse or any better, again, than last year. But the only bad thing, other than the, running out of fuel, again, deliberately at the end, the only bad thing, and I know don't read too much into lap times, but the only bad thing about today, I think, was when he did a lower fuel run, and he definitely did do a lower fueled run when he set his 1:17.0. On the C5 compound, if you compare that to what Perez did, it wasn't at all an impressive lap time from Kimi Räikkönen. Yeah, he's definitely not, and I agree. The engine modes aren't turned up. He wasn't very skinny on fuel, but to be on that compound of tyre and to only do a 17.0 and be about, a quarter of a second faster than Perez when he should be quite a bit faster, again, not that impressive of a lap time. And I guarantee you, if Perez on the similar engine mode or similar fuel was on that tyre, he probably would have, gone straight into the 1:16s, probably a 16.5 or a 16.4 at least. So again, for Alfa, compared to Racing Point, not that impressive, but hopefully we see a bit more lower fueled running from Alfa Romeo tomorrow. Next up is Haas, and well, the day was going so well. They, again, Grosjean did the most amount of laps for any driver, 158 laps, going so well. Consistency was there. Reliability is definitely there. And then Romain Grosjean goes and puts it in the barriers at turn 4 with, I don't think it was a driver mistake. I think it was just a weird snap of oversteer. He wasn't running exactly on line on the exit of turn 4. He was running maybe slightly wide, but the rear end just completely snapped away from him and he went straight into the barriers, broke a bit of a rear wing off and was out of the session. But up until that point, very good. We never really got to see the Haas on TV though, so I can't really tell you anything about what the balance of the car looks like. But again, reliability is there. So I guess, except for the crash, a mostly good day. And the final team is Williams, who had another good day. Again, Russell, a lot faster than what he was going this time last year in preseason testing on his second day of 2020 testing, and that is of course a great thing to see. And I think you can already tell that this Williams car out of the entire field will be the biggest improvers in terms of their lap time compared to what they did this time last year, which is not a massive surprise because they really should be gaining the most amount of time out of anyone, but it is good to see that progression is being made. Again, car on track. When we looked at the onboards, the onboard of the Williams, the car did look good. It looked a lot better than last year. So maybe it doesn't look good in comparison to other cars. But again, compared to last year, a lot better. The front end is a lot better. The rear end is sticking a lot more. The Williams car is miles better. Absolutely miles better than it was this time last year. So good to see. And hopefully Williams are going to continue this into day 3 and the second test as well. But that's it for day 2, guys. Don't forget to join me tomorrow for my watch along with the afternoon session of day 3. And don't forget as well to check out my review of day 3 as well. Hopefully a day 3 where we get to see the teams push just that little bit more.